in North America versus at home, busyness and being stressed is something that people look favorably on here rather than the outcome of your work,
Mm.
which is something we've had to kind of adjust to because if you're not stressed, if you're not working all hours of the night sometimes or most times, then you're not doing a good job or you're not being
Yeah,
perceived as doing a good job. Whereas
yeah.
somebody who takes the time to, have their lunch, comes in at 9, leaves at 5, doesn't work in the middle of the night or at weekends all the time just because, not when there's a specific project or something where everybody kind of needs to muck in and do the extra hours, but this is just like a consistent behavior,
Hmm.
which is shocking to us from the culture we're from, where mostly, you're in at 9, out at 5, your lunch is 1 to 2, you don't do
Hmm.
anything during your lunchtime, and people seem to be happy for it. I
No,
don't know.
no, I view it very similar to, I view, or more specifically, I view it like this, and I think it's something that I would try to push. It's like it's not exactly radical. I'm not going to be one of those people that's like, I just had a totally original thought. No, lots of people think of it. Time is money. There's a reason that phrase exists. If you view time as a resource, as a currency that you have to spend, right, then you really think about your return of investment for that currency that you're spending. And so, just as how it's incredibly important for people to have financial literacy, like you have to know how to budget, you have to know like the limitations of the money that you have coming in versus like how you're going to put that out there, what you're getting for that. Like,
Mm,
you have to know that if you were bringing in $2,000 a month and you rent a place for 1950 a month, that is bad financial literacy. You have
mhm,
spent all of your time on this one thing that is important, but then like how are you going to pay for everything else, right? You can take that mentality and apply it directly to time. And so if as a leader you have X amount of time, right, in a given day or week, and you spend all of that time on this one thing that is important, but isn't full time important, then
mhm,
you have now bad time literacy and you are ineffective in your job. You have to develop good time literacy and use it as an actual currency and
mhm,
make sure that the time investment you are doing has the appropriate outcomes.
mhm.
And that is something that is not necessarily as fully talked about. And so this is why, as leaders, you have to be able to say, well, where can I literally spend my time the most effectively so that I can have the biggest impact on what only I can do?
Mhm.
And how much of everything else can I delegate to that somebody else can do, right?
Mhm.
And really using that time effectively. And that is something that is difficult, as financial literacy can be very difficult for people to learn as they get into adulthood, but it
Mhm.
is something that is just as important as a skill. And if you don't have good time literacy, you're not going to be a good and effective leader.
Mhm. Yeah.
Hot take. It's not that hot, really. It's like basic.
No, yeah.
But
No,
like,
I know. It seems obvious, but you don't get the time to you need to focus on things, especially if you're being delegated to, something that you need to get done, but then a leader sends you something and you have to focus on that and forget what you're doing, what else you're doing, and then you kind of have to do that at another point. And there's this emergency thing that we've touched on, that
yeah,
everything that a leader delegates to you is more of an emergency than anything else because you need to please them and get that done for them, but everything else then falls to the side. So
yeah,
I
yeah.
think I think we're identifying a lot of things that just are the norms of the working environment.
Sure.
But being able to say them and, address them and make, that note that they are there, be aware of them, can make
Mm-hmm.
everybody kind of better understand everyone else. You
Mm-hmm.
that if my manager who tells me to do something is aware that the direction they're giving me to do something straight away means something else is not going to get done, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore they're not expecting me to work late that night for something that's really not urgent, that can be done tomorrow when there's not an emergency from a leader who needs something
Mm-hmm.
done straight away. So people being aware of other people's surroundings and their environment and what they're being tasked with is kind of a thing as well.
Yeah, yeah. And like, I mean, this is down to being able to have like open and effective communication to
Exactly. Yeah.
prioritize. And like prioritization isn't done in isolation, right? Most prioritization is done in conversation with other people. And so, in that example, if someone comes to you with something, but you were in the middle of something else, it's very difficult to do, and it's a big ask of someone of a subordinate to do to their manager. But the conversation at that point does need to be, yeah, hey, happy to do that. Here's what else is on my plate.
Hmm.
How would you like me to prioritize this? because I
Yeah.
can't do it all at once, right?
Yeah.
And in turn, those managers and leaders need to be able to enable an environment where those conversations can happen. Because if
Yeah.
you don't, everybody loses. Like everybody loses
Yeah.
in a scenario where you are, as a company, unable to prioritize effectively. You're unable to tie everything into your bigger goals. If you're unable to see the bigger picture, it
Mhm.
doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
your whole operational structure needs to be able to
Mhm.
have all of these processes run smoothly within them.
Yeah.
And
Because a lot of people would be afraid to say to their manager,
they would.
well, I'm not going to get this done because they'll be like, why won't you get it done? What else are you doing? And then you're kind of put on
Yeah.
the spot to explain all the little things that you're doing that take time, but might not seem like a huge deal at the same time. Like, you
Yeah.
get this
But
spreadsheet.
then also that's a valid question. And I think this is where sometimes like tone is misread. And
Mm,
so if someone said to me, "Oh, I can't get this done," and I say, "Oh, what else have you on?"
yeah.
It's because I'm asking, "What else have you on?" Because let me tell you what you can drop.
Mm,
Whereas I think some people misread tone and say, "Well, what else are you doing?" And it's like, no,
yeah.
no, no. I literally just asked,
Yeah.
what else are you doing?
I
Because
think
I
the way
will
you
help
said it there is
you
perfectly fine.
prioritize it.
I think some managers might say it in a way that
Oh
kind of
yeah, they might.
implies that you don't have anything else going on.
They might, yeah,
No, and
for
then it's
sure.
this miscommunication between the styles of like how they go.
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think this is where it gets very tricky when most of communication in companies now happens over text.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, yeah, there's implied tone that is mostly people's own projection, and that makes it very, very tricky for communication. Like,
Yeah.
I love that things like Teams and Slack and etc. have made communication quicker. And honestly, it speeds up so many things, and the collaboration that you can do, especially within remote environments, is fantastic.
Yeah.
But tone reading is a big problem.
It is. And
Yeah.
as I might have said before, the use of punctuation in messaging on digital platforms is now used as a way to convey tone, and there's different levels of what people read from it,
Mhm.
what kind of punctuation you use. Like, younger people would view certain punctuations as being very rude or not rude or just not anything really. There's all these different variations to it. Someone used a full stop, they're mad at you. All the like it's
Yeah.
so nuanced and depending on generation. So it's kind of also just being aware of that too, you
Being
know?
aware of it is important, but I
Yeah.
also think this comes back to like authenticity at work. It's kind of like,
Yeah.
especially when you consider people who might be new into a working environment, is understanding that you can't actually bring the hangover of how you communicate with your friends into a
Hmm.
working environment and expect it to be the same. Just
Hmm.
because you and your friends or, etc., people online and social media have come to use punctuation a certain way, that doesn't mean that you can apply that to a professional environment.
Hmm.
And so you kind of have to come in as almost like a blank slate
Hmm.
and take things at face value
Hmm.
until it's proven otherwise,
Hmm.
right?
And knowing the
Um,
person who's sending the message to, and if you have if you can trust that kind of what they're like and that they're not likely implying something or anything like that as well. So kind of building that trust with a manager that is very consistent in their behaviors, but something might sound like it's a little off, but like your experience with them leads you to kind of know that that's not,
yes,
so you're
yeah.
kind of talking yourself out of it a little bit because of the experience you've had with them.
And also but that happens the other way around. Like I have mentored a few different people, and one of the things with a kind of a subset of them has been where they've come to me very upset because someone has, sent them a message or an email or whatever
Yeah.
that's been like really harsh, and they're really upset by being called out, or they thought it was very insulting, whatever. And then they've shown me that message, and I've been like, what are you talking about? This
Hmm.
is a
Hmm.
completely neutral message. Like everything that you're saying is in there is not in there.
Yeah.
And that has happened a lot, like
Yeah.
more than you mean. You'd be incredibly surprised as how often it's happened. And it's great that they were able to come to me because these were people that I mentored, so I could kind of like help them along, right? And again, this is normally people who are newer into the workplace, and that's fine. And you kind of have to learn that, but it is this kind of thing of like, okay, they'll read it to me, and they'll read it with all this intonation, and I'll say, okay, I hear you. Let me read it to you. And then I'll read it as I read it in a neutral tone. And then they'll go, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah,
Yeah.
uh, that's not whatever you perceived that. I'm
Hmm.
not sure if that's something that because then obviously we might have gone into, okay, tell me about your relationship with this, like your professional relationship with this
Well, that's what
person,
I was going to say.
what
Yeah.
interactions you've had so far. But also like, why do you think that this is inherently negative? And normally it would come from their own insecurities or imposter syndrome of their own work that they're projecting onto a message that they've received.
Hmm.
So they could be like, oh, they've been like, they're really giving me shit about this like deadline. And I'm like, okay, are they? It looks like they've just asked you for
An
the
update.
expected timeline. And why do you think that's negative? They're like, well, it's because I'm a little behind and I just feel stressed with it. And I'm like, okay, so it
Mm.
sounds like you're beating yourself up over your own timeline because you're not happy with your own work. What
Mm.
but this person said they just asked you when would you
Yeah,
have
you're
it done by?
projecting it onto
It
them.
was a very neutral. So I think that there's sides here to it that have to be
Yeah.
considered as well of yes, it is inevitable that social trends leak into professional environments. And that is something that we have to be conscious of. And also I think we have to be careful not to like fully throw our kind of
Mm.
internal kind of like projections and anxieties onto other people's communications in text
Hmm.
specifically. We get a lot more context in person, right? We're on a video call with someone or on a phone call with someone. It's a lot easier to pick up on
Read.
what's going down, and that's
Yeah.
generally fairly accurate, right? But I think text is
Hmm.
such a difficult place to navigate.
Yeah. Well, I will flip it on another side to you
One,
to consider. So I have been in a situation where I've received an email that I have shown to HR
mm,
because, or they've asked for proof, okay, because I've come to them with an issue. And out of context for them, they don't know the relationship. So
yeah,
I knew that, earlier on that day, that person had been like so friendly and nothing had happened and they were being like best friends, like, using all this kind of like really like exclamation, all this type of stuff. And then they would send me an email that was completely different to the way they had behaved earlier on. And it would, to me, signal, that I don't know what it would exactly signal, but it would be confusing for me and I wouldn't understand the tone of it. And
yeah,
the HR person would be like, well, that just reads like a normal email. But in the context of the way they behaved earlier on versus that really kind of short email that just seemed very abrupt and almost rude to me, didn't
mm,
seem to them like it was abrupt. And I would show them different kind of instances of that would not come across to somebody who's not in that relationship and doesn't have the
yeah,
context for it. It seems very like, oh, that's nothing. But over time, the inconsistencies in the relationship and kind of like getting an abrupt message from somebody who, that day had been, a completely different tone and it's very hard to kind of
yeah,
know what to expect from people. So
yeah,
again, very nuanced, very hard to,
very, yeah.
it's a
And
very
that
personal
happens too.
thing.
Like there's
Yeah.
definitely people. I mean, like we're all people. There's going to be bad people everywhere. There's definitely people out there who never grew out of their secondary school mentality and
Mhm.
know how to play that system a little bit and know how to make it look normal, right? And that for sure happens too, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah.
and again, I think it's the context there that's important, right? It's kind of like there's if you're talking about basically moving goalposts, right? You're talking about changing expectations, right?
Mm.
Or inconsistent expectations.
Yeah.
That's something that yeah can be very
Mhm.
disconcerting for anybody, for an employee, right? And so yeah, I think it's very different if you have a long kind of standing history with a person and there's
Mhm.
there's shifting
Yeah.
expectations and shifting moods,
Yeah.
then you know you
That's
can
hard for that's hard for the person looking at it
very difficult, yeah, because
to
how do they, yeah,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
rightly or wrongly they would need to see actual like
Hmm.
hard evidence that they could say, yeah, this was inappropriate, right?
Hmm.
It's a lot trickier to root down, kind of subversive bullying almost, right? Can be a
Yeah.
lot more difficult to be able to observe, right?
Yeah.
Because if somebody is actively
Right.
doing that, they're not doing it in public and they're not doing it in writing,
Oh,
right?
they're very smart about the way they do it, that it doesn't
Yeah,
come
yeah, yeah,
across to an outsider reading it, but to the person who knows the relationship, they know that saying something
yeah,
that way means something to them, you
yeah.
know?